Hey buddy, watch this.
Hello, RegisKillbin is the name and Hearthstone is the game, and this is my in-depth analysis of the new card from the Witchwood, Genn Greymane. As you can see right here behind me, Genn Greymane, of course, a new neutral legendary, if you didn't hear, a 6-mana 6/5 who at the start of the game has an effect if your deck has only even cost cards, your starting hero power costs 1. So Genn Greymane alongside essentially his opposite Baku the Moon Eater, which I will cover in a future video, are both building Hearthstone down these even and odd decks, as they're now being called. Genn Greymane, of course, inspiring even decks, because you have to build your deck with all even cards in order to get this hero power. So much like Reno Jackson in the past sort of reshaped how we thought about deck building, and even cards more recently like Prince Keleseth have done that same sort of thing, and cards like Spiteful Summoner even have changed how decks are built. Genn Greymane is taking all of that and he's taking it to a completely new level. So it seems like Blizzard is pretty clearly making this a point of emphasis in the Witchwood. There are going to be even some more cards to support this mechanic, some of which we've seen so far, others which we haven't. So for Genn Greymane, what I wanted to do here is essentially take a look at every single class in the game and list out their cards that are even, that are really, really good, that will be supported by Genn Greymane. In other words, what cards can you run in a Genn Greymane deck that are going to work, but also what cards are you going to miss out on? What great cards from a class are going to be missing and really hurt your ability to build a successful Genn Greymane deck. So that's what you're going to see in this video. I wanted to make a couple notes. First and foremost, I'm only going to be looking at cards from the classic set and the current rotation. In other words, Journey to Unguro, Knights of the Frozen Throne, and Kobolds and Catacombs, nothing from before. Those other sets will have moved to Wild, and this video is going to focus on standard format. On top of that, I'm not going to look too closely at neutral cards here, because there's a couple reasons. First off, there are so many neutral cards available in a set at any given time that you're more likely to be able to fill in the slots. It's not going to be as big of a concern. Also, neutral cards aren't usually as defining as class cards. They aren't as mandatory or necessary to run, so I think it's a less interesting angle by which to look at Genn Greymane. And then finally, I'm also going to take a look at each class's hero power and how good that's going to be with Genn Greymane, because I think some hero powers are certainly better than others. And finally, I'll essentially rate each class on how well I think Genn Greymane will fit in that class if there is a deck or an archetype that could exist. So all of that said, let's go ahead and jump into our first class here with Druid. So when it comes to Druid, you can see pretty quickly here that there are a lot more good cards for Genn Greymane than there are missing ones. The left side of the screen is much more loaded down with cards than the right. So, of course, starting off, Ultimate Infestation, a staple in Druid now. It's in pretty much every Druid deck there is. It's one of the highest power level cards in Hearthstone. That's a good starting place. That's enough sometimes to make Druid competitive all on its own. But beyond that, you also have classic class staples like Wild Growth, Swipe, and Wrath. Those have been run in virtually every mid or late game style Druid deck since the beginning of time. And then beyond that, in the second row there, you start with cards that are from the newer expansions, but still really great defensive tools: Spreading Plague, Ironwood Golem, Branching Paths, and Oaken Summons, all being run very successfully in Druid today. And then that final row down there, we have what I would call archetype enablers. Things like Power of the Wild and Druid of the Swarm have been run successfully in Token Druid. Innervate's a big Druid card from time to time. Moonfire has been a Malygos Druid card. Now, those are all great cards in and of themselves. I do think each of those and each of those archetypes would have trouble working with Genn Greymane, notably Token Druid. It's a lot harder to build a faster, aggressive deck if you don't have the consistency of early drop minions to play on board all the time. Moonfire clearly doesn't work very well without Malygos, and Malygos is a 9-mana card, so not something you could run in a Genn Greymane deck. Now, looking at the other side of the screen when it comes to missing cards, there are some great cards that are missing if you're trying to build a Genn Greymane deck. You can't run Malfurion the Pestilent. That's a pretty big hit. You can't run Nourish. That has also been a staple ramp and card draw card for a lot of different Druid decks. Things like Savage Roar are gone, and Living Mana are gone, hurting token builds. Cryptolord as well, another token card that's just missing. And then Druid of the Claw, not something we've seen much lately, but still a 5-drop you can't run in a Genn deck. And then Lesser Jasper Spellstone, a card that's found a lot of success lately since its release in Kobolds and Catacombs. Also, you're not going to get it. So, I mean, the missing cards probably restrict your ability to do things like a token deck right off the bat, but there's a lot of stuff to work with. You have some great class staples, super high power level cards on the good side. So when it comes to card availability, Druid looks like a pretty strong fit for Genn Greymane, particularly in slower decks. Now, when it comes to the hero power, how well does that fare with Genn Greymane? You get a 1-mana Druid hero power, and frankly, that's fine. It's not super exciting. It's one of those things where it's going to occasionally land because you do have that extra 1 mana, but usually, in my experience, Druid has 2 mana to hero power most of the time anyway. So I don't think the Genn Greymane bonus on the hero power for Druid will be all that significant. And of course, if the hero power is not all that significant, what good does it matter if you can run good cards? Because why are you playing this style of deck if you're not getting really strong value out of the hero power that sort of challenges the entire reason to build a Genn Greymane deck? So that does make me a little nervous. It's fine, of course. A 1-mana hero power is always better than a 2-mana hero power. But as we look through other classes, I think you'll start to see why other classes have way better utilizations of the discount on Genn Greymane, because in a slower, more control-style deck in general, that mana discount just isn't going to go as far, because the later you get into the game, the more mana you have to work with, the more often you're able to spend on the hero power anyway, so the discount won't be relevant. The real difference here for this hero power is going to be squeezing in an extra ping here and there when you're playing like a Wild Growth alongside it on turn 3, those sorts of things. So ultimately, I'm going to say this is actually a poor hero power for Genn Greymane. Now, that doesn't mean poor in general. In a vacuum, obviously it's good, but in comparison, in context to other decks, I think this one falls a little short. And then finally, all of that considered, when you consider the card quality, the missing cards, the hero power, the kinds of decks you might be able to play with Druid, I'm going to give Druid a final verdict of a B-. I think you could build a Genn Greymane deck. There are clearly cards to work with, but I think the question ultimately is, why would you if the hero power is not rewarding you all that much? So it's okay, but not outstanding. So up next, let's talk about Hunter. And Hunter has a pretty good balance here of the number of good cards on each side of the screen, as you can see. But as you start to dive a little deeper, I think you'll see there are some connection issues between the two. So for instance, on the good card side, of course, all of the secrets are even cost cards. So you could build a secret deck. The problem with building a secret deck with Genn Greymane is that you can't run Lesser Emerald Spellstone, essentially the best secret synergy card, nor can you run things like Cloaked Huntress or Eaglehorn Bow. So yes, you get a lot of good secrets, but how do you use them in a sensible and powerful way? You also get some really strong minions on the left side of the board here. Savannah Highmane, Houndmaster, Crackling Razormaw, Scavenging Hyena, all awesome Hunter minions. But if you're trying to play a deck like that, where it's a really curve-centric deck, where it's important to hit that Crackling Razormaw on 2, on a minion, it's important to hit that Houndmaster on 4, on a minion, it's important to empower your Scavenging Hyena with things like Unleash the Hounds or early Alley Cat style plays. Alley Cat is rotating, but any kind of 1-drop minion, same story. You can't do that because you miss all the 3-drops. You don't have 1-drops to play. You don't have Unleash the Hounds. You have a much harder time hitting stuff on curve, so each of those minions in a more mid-range style deck feels a lot worse to me. Rexxar in a vacuum is fine. It's a card that can work in any sort of environment, so that's a good one to have around. To My Side is really not a card that's played all that much, but it's really, really hard to put together a spell deck when you're cutting out half of your mana. There's just not enough spells to work with. An all-spell deck in general doesn't make much sense either with Genn Greymane, so that's not very helpful either. So, looking at the list, there are a lot of good cards. The problem is, you just can't work with them. There's no way to build a deck that I can see to empower all these different cards. And then when you look at missing cards, man, there are some heavy-hitting missing cards here. Animal Companion, Kill Command, Eaglehorn Bow, 3 cards that are in every Druid deck, it seems. Whether it's spell-based, mid-range, those cards are so fundamentally important. The Spellstone is basically the driving force for Hunter right now. Little cards like Candle Shot Tracking are also gone. Even filler pieces like Deadly Shot and Bear Shark you can't run. So to me, Hunter just looks like a terrible fit for Genn Greymane. Might make sense with Baku the Moon Eater, but absolutely impossible to work with for Genn Greymane. Which I think is unfortunate, because as I talk about the hero power, I think the Hunter hero power is actually a really strong fit for Genn Greymane. Being able to consistently do 2 damage for 1 mana is exactly what Hunter wants to do. If you could build a really high-pressure Hunter deck that gets a lot of aggression, that looks to kill your opponent quickly, being able to weave in that super cheap hero power is going to make a huge impact. It's going to kill them so much faster, because often it's hard to find that 2 mana to squeeze in a hunter hero power, but 1 mana makes it far, far more likely. So basically a great hero power utilization, just trouble with the cards. And that leads me to the final verdict. If the cards don't work, doesn't matter how good the hero power is, it's just you're not going to be able to build a Genn Greymane deck. It's too much trouble. You're missing too much stuff. Your options are limited, archetypically speaking, and I don't see how you can put together a good deck. Even if there are new cards that come out and change that, there's just not going to be enough to work with. You have to have some of these fundamental class cards. So for me, final verdict for Hunter, C-. It would frankly be even lower if it weren't just for how good this hero power is. That might very occasionally be reason enough to put together a deck, but I really doubt it. I think it'd be too hard, so this one's just probably not going to work. So up next we have Mage here, and Mage is a little bit of a mixed bag again too. Mage has some really, really good, like top-level even cards. Fireball, Frostbolt, Sorcerer's Apprentice, Polymorph, Blizzard, Water Elemental. Those are just classic card staples, always big parts of Mage. Tend to lean a little slower than faster, although Fireball, Frostbolt, and Sorcerer's Apprentice can certainly go both ways. On top of that, some newer cards like Arcanologist, Alaneth, Meteor, Pyros occasionally, Water Elemental, those things, or excuse me, Primordial Glyph, already talked about Water Elemental. Those all add on top for even more good cards. But as you look, again, at building a deck out of all of those, particularly a card like Arcanologist, for instance, completely useless in a Genn Greymane environment because you can't run 3-mana secrets. You could generate some secrets from time to time. You don't have to run them in your deck that way, but that's all about drawing them from your deck. So there's no point for Arcanologist. Doesn't make any sense. And a card like Alaneth, really, really good in Secret Mage right now, but is Alaneth good enough if you don't have all those secret tempo cards and fast start cards like Mana Worm and Explosive Runes and Kirin Mage, if you look on the right side of the screen? There may just not be enough to work with to make Alaneth relevant. Yes, you keep the burn, but is there enough to get over the top? Is there enough chip damage to really make it work? So, again, there's stuff to work with, but does it all fit together? Is there enough? Does it make sense in an archetype to squeeze it all in and empower Genn Greymane? Now, for a missing card standpoint, you can see there's some pretty heavy hitters missing in Mage 2. All of the late game control type heavy bomb cards, Frostless Jaina, Dragoncaller Lana that we see now, those are gone. Antonight is gone. Flame Strike and Dragon's Fury's removal are gone. Arcane Artificer is your life gain without Ice Block, is gone. So, to me, it looks like there are some big gaps for Mage to fill as well. I just don't think it's going to fit Genn Greymane at all. From a hero power standpoint, a 1-mana ping is another one of those middle-of-the-road hero powers. It's totally fine. You can squeeze it in occasionally. It works. It would be pretty good in an aggressive deck, too. And if you could put an aggressive deck together, that would be nice. So I'll say the hero power is good for Genn Greymane. Not great, but good. And that leads me to a final verdict, which is essentially that this class is going to have a whole lot of trouble, much like other ones before it. Despite some good cards, it's just there's not enough in any given direction to make sense. Some of the aggro cards are here, some of the aggro cards are there. Some of the control cards are here, some of the control cards are there. It just doesn't fit together. So for a final verdict for Mage, I'm going to land on a C. Moving on to Paladin, this one strikes you right away. There are a ton of good even cost cards in Paladin, and really not that many missing cards that are odd cost. You're losing Righteous Protector, Unidentified Maul, Lost in the Jungle, Level Up, Divine Favor. Those are all cards that see play today in Dude Paladin and Vine Cleaver, I guess, too. You're also losing your Death Knight. But given the quality of the cards and the assortment of cards on the other side of the field, I think you can sacrifice some of those missing cards because you get Tyrion, Spike Ridge Steed, all the great 4-drops in Paladin. I didn't even put True Silver Champion on here, but the Consecration, Blessing of Kings, True Silver. You also get Dude Paladin synergy cards like Drygulch Jailer, Crystal Lion, Lightfuse Stegodon, and Sunkeeper Tarim. The most important card of all is probably Call to Arms you get to keep. So I still think despite losing a couple things like Lost in the Jungle and Righteous Protector from an aggressive Dude Paladin deck, there's still a lot to work with. Not to mention that I think this is one of the very best hero powers for Genn Greymane, because being able to consistently pump out a 1-mana 1/1 is really powerful in an aggressive Paladin deck, especially when your deck is all about using your Silverhand recruits. Because Paladin as an archetype right now is so successfully connected to its hero power, that makes Genn Greymane 10 times better than the classes we've looked at so far. And I think that actually makes up for the fact that you lose things like Vine Cleaver and Lost in the Jungle, and even that level up, because you're able to more consistently get your dudes on the board anyway. So there's plenty to work with as far as I'm concerned. I could see a Paladin, dude Paladin, maybe even a mid-rangey dude Paladin, and a little bit less aggressive one, really finding some success in a Genn Greymane style deck. That hero power is a consistent and valuable tool. There are a lot of strong cards to work with. So for me, from a card standpoint, Paladin is one of the very best classes for Genn Greymane. From a hero power standpoint, one of the very best classes. Final verdict for Paladin, as far as I'm concerned, absolute A+. This might be the Genn Greymane deck. So now we're up to Priest, and Priest is a tough one to look at and assess, I have to say. There are clearly some good cards for Priest here, but as you look at that list, you don't see necessarily anything lining up perfectly. For instance, if you go to like Combo Priest, a deck that's really popular on the ladder right now because of cards like Divine Spirit and Inner Fire, you've got Divine Spirit, you've got Radiant Elemental, those are some great Combo Priest cards, but then you're missing out on Power Word Shield and, of course, Inner Fire. So that's immediately a failure. That doesn't ever come together. If you look at things like Dragon Priest, that's a problem anyway because Draconid Operative is rotating out of standard format, so who knows where that leaves Duskbreaker, for instance. That might not go too far. Shadow Visions is a card that's probably going to be good no matter what. Anduin is one of those cards that could be okay. Shadow Word Pain is fine, but can Big Priest survive in a Genn Greymane environment for Eternal Servitude to work? I really don't think so. I think it'd have trouble. So, although there are a handful of really strong Priest cards that work with Genn Greymane, you just can't fit them all into a deck. It doesn't add up. It doesn't make sense. They don't do things that support one another. So to me, that's a really big hurdle to overcome. When it comes to missing cards, it's not so bad. There are clearly some great cards: Lyra, Obsidian Statue, Psychic Scream, Shadow Word Death, Northshire Cleric, of course, one of these staples of Priest. You're losing some stuff. I think you could build a deck that gets by without any one of those given cards. It'd probably be okay, but it certainly doesn't help. So Priest looks pretty underwhelming as far as I'm concerned from a card standpoint. There's just nothing that seems to fit together. Now, moving on to the hero power for Priest, I think it's a problem too. I just don't think a low-cost hero power is all that good, because that low-cost hero power is going to be best in the early to mid-game, and often as a Priest in the early to mid-game, you just don't have any way to use your hero power. You might not have gotten attacked yet, so you can't even heal your face. Frankly, even healing your face on turn 2 or 3 is not a board impactful kind of play that sets you up for success, so it still feels like a waste. And that to me means that this is just not a good fit at all. Hero power is really, really tough to use. Even if you did get early minions onto the board and you were able to heal them up, Northshire Cleric's one of the very best cards to do that with, and you can't run it. So it doesn't make any sense at all. Gets really low value in the late game too. Terrible hero power. Terrible hero power for Genn Greymane. So for a final verdict, this is a really, really tough one to make fit. The cards don't work. The hero power is an absolute mess. That to me means Priest is a D+. And it's only a D+ because there are a handful of good cards that you can maybe get started with, but ultimately this one's just not going to work. So now let's move on to Rogue. And Rogue is another one that's a little bit hard to assess, because as far as archetypes for Rogue go right now, we basically have like Miracle Rogue and Kingsbane Rogue and sometimes Tempo Rogue, but that's not really a thing all that much. Now, pretty quickly you can weed out Kingsbane Rogue for Genn Greymane. Kingsbane is an odd card. That doesn't work. Miracle Rogue you could potentially work with, because Gadget's and Auctioneer is a 6-drop. All of these 0 and 2 cost spells that are popular in Miracle Rogue make sense. Falderized Rider is a 4-drop. The things you're really missing that are good for Miracle Rogue are things like Edwin Van Cleef, which can occasionally just win you early games, SI7 Agent for that early tempo. Spells like Fan of Knives and Cold Blood are missing too, which are important pieces for finding damage. Leroy Jenkins can't be a part of the deck, so your burst options are limited, although you do still have the Eviscerates. So it feels like maybe that could be an option, but I'm afraid that Miracle Rogue needs so many spells and so much stuff to work with that it might be hard to put enough in there to empower that card draw engine. So that's a challenge, although it does also have things like Elven Minstrel too, which is important for card draw. So I just don't see, like, if you look at these great cards on the rogue side, they all are good, but they're all so specific in their utility, and they try to accomplish very, very narrow sorts of things, so that they're not good, like, deck builders. They're so dependent on synergies and archetypes that they just don't seem to me like they're ever going to fit into a cohesive piece. Miracle Rogue seems like the only option, and that's a pretty tough one to pull off, too. When it comes to missing cards beyond the handful I mentioned, Vile Spine Slayer is a really important piece for tempo. That's tough, as is SI7 Agent. Valera's gone. I don't know how many implications that has, but that's another consideration to make. So I think Rogue looks like another one that's a pretty tough fit to get all these cards to make sense for Genn Greymane. Now, as far as the hero power is concerned, a 1-mana hero power for Rogue is fine. There's probably one turn where that's really good, right? If you can just play it on turn 1, that's better than Rogue often has, as far as turn 1 plays are concerned. But the real issue with that is that Rogue often only needs to hit their hero power button every other turn. Usually you're happy to hold that second charge for a turn down the line, which means the discount from Genn Greymane is essentially halved in its efficiency. Essentially, classes like Paladin or Shaman that get something new out of their hero power every time can hit it every turn and still get some real value. Rogue might essentially get half the value if they hit it every turn. So you're just decreasing the likelihood that that was a significant play. And yes, it's always theoretically adding 1 durability, but that's just not as significant as summoning an entirely new minion into being. So when you think about the hero power cards in combination, to me, that leaves Rogue in a really, really tough spot. I think this is another D+ as far as fit for Genn Greymane is concerned. So next, let's talk about Shaman. And woo boy, this is something. As far as missing cards are concerned, Shaman is missing a lot of good stuff, as you can see. Now, you might not say any of these cards are particularly awesome right now. They're just good. You know, these are cards that Shaman has successfully played in the past. Shaman right now is not a defining class in the meta, so you're probably not too heartbroken to lose any individual one of these, but when you take them as a whole, it's going to be hard to build stuff without these sorts of cards. They are mostly control cards. If you look at them, they're often slower, more defensively minded things, playing towards the late game, but there are also some aggressive cards missing, like Bloodlust, Lava Burst, and Lightning Bolt too. So really, almost any way you want to play Shaman, you're going to be missing something really, really important. And then when you look at good cards, I had to be pretty darn generous to even get this many even Shaman cards into the video. Because right now, of course, things like Alakir, not all that played. Grumble, pretty hard to play. Kalamos, not successful all that much. Murmuring Elemental, it's fine, but you know, Shaman just isn't being played much right now, so you don't see these cards often either. Now, clearly, Hex and Fire Elemental are some classic staples that are historically good. Flametongue Totem and Primal Fin Totem also great for that token style of play, but can you imagine trying to build a deck out of only those class cards? You'd have to pull in so many neutral cards. I just don't see how it would ever work. There's just not enough there. You can maybe see some elemental themes happening. It just doesn't seem like it's going to work for me. Now, there is one extra thing to talk about here. At the time of this video's publication, there's been one extra Shaman even cost synergy card revealed, the Merkspark Eel, as you'll see here on your screen. This is meant to empower even style Shaman decks. And it's a solid card, right? It's far above average for a 2-drop minion. It makes sense for Shaman's probably early game focus that Shaman has often found a lot of success with. This is a card I gave 3 stars in my review. And Blizzard basically revealed that they made this card and a handful of others, which I'll talk about in my Baku the Moon Eater video, that are odd deck focused. They made this card, though, to empower this style of play for classes in which it doesn't seem to fit. So even Blizzard recognized that Shaman seems like a pretty terrible fit for Genn Greymane, and they gave it a deck specifically to prop up that as an option. And I unfortunately do not think the Merkspark Eel is good enough to make this make sense, which is a shame, because if you go to the hero power, Shaman's a fantastic hero power for Genn Greymane. Not quite as good as Paladin, because Totem still lacks some consistency. That random element is tough to work around, but still getting a minion all the time is cool. And for 1 mana, that's fantastic. So that's a shame because the cards just don't work, even with Merc Spark Eel on top. So for me, despite Blizzard's efforts to prop up this class, it's still an F when it comes to a Genn Greymane fit. So up next is Warlock, and if you look real closely at the Warlock cards there on the even side, you can see there's some really good stuff that's defining in the meta right now, starting of course with Blood Reaver Gul'dan. That is awesome. If you just looked at that half of the screen, you'd say Warlock was an awesome fit for Genn Greymane for even cost cards. The problem is, despite how good all of those cards are and how much those see play today, the real issue is the right side of the screen. There's a lot of stuff missing. There are so many fantastic cards at odd costs for Warlock. Of course, most notably is the Demon package of Possessed Lackey, Skull of the Mare, Doomguard, Voidlord, and Dark Pact, which empowers Cube Lock, right now the most prominent deck in Hearthstone, not to mention Carnivorous Cube, not pictured here, also an odd mana card at 5. And beyond that, even if you move towards like a more aggressive mindset with cards like Soulfire Flame Imp, Voidwalker, and even Despicable Dreadlord, all staples in Zoo-style decks. Guess what? Also odd-cost cards. Kobold Librarian, play it across the board. Can't play him either. So it looks like you'd have a lot to work with on the good side of things, but just filling in the gaps and missing all of these incredibly high-powered cards, I think hurts Warlock a little too much. So it might look split, but in reality, it's pretty tough for Warlock to put together as good of a deck as they can right now, utilizing odd-cost cards. Now, when it comes to the hero power for Warlock, getting a 1-mana card draw is great. Clearly, drawing a card for 1 mana is exactly what everybody wants to do. I will say that it's a little less exciting as some of the other classes simply because Warlock's hero power is already so good. So, you know, it's going from like an 8 out of 10 to a 10 out of 10. Paladin's going from like a 6 out of 10 to a 10 out of 10. So it feels a little less decisive or important to include Genn Greymane because I just don't think you're going to get quite as much upside from the discount as there might be in other classes. Still, though, very, very strong. And then finally, for the final verdict, because there's already such a good way to play Warlock and it utilizes so many odd cost cards, I'm going to have to go ahead and give Warlock a C+. There's some stuff there. It makes sense. The hero power is good, but ultimately it's just not exciting enough to really push you over the edge. And then finally here I have one last class. This is Warrior. And once again, Warrior's a bit of a mixed bag, which is to be expected because these cards are basically half and half. But I think my eye is more immediately pulled towards the missing cards side of thing. And you can see there are a lot of good cards over there. And even cards across multiple archetypes, right? You've got the defensive cards like the shield blocks and the brawls and the shield slams and the whirlwinds. You've got taunts like Direhorn Hatchling. Mountain Fire Armor is another defensively minded card. Weapons with Fiery War Axe, Arcanite Reaper, Gorehowl. And then even more aggressive cards like Frothing Berserker or Upgrade that have been run in Pirates. All of that stuff is gone. Now, there are some good cards too, obviously, and in fact cards that look like they could build a bit of a foundation of a control-style warrior. You got the Dead Man's Hand Fatigue package, Blood Razor executes a good combo, Slam is really important, Armor Smith is there, Bring It On is there, Grom, of course, as your finisher is there. That's a nice little core, but I have to ask, can that core work without cards like Shield Block and Brawl? And I don't know. There can't possibly be enough new cards added in this set to make a Control Warrior function with only half of the total Control Warrior options available to the class in the set right now. And a Pirate Warrior certainly isn't going to make sense, so I don't really know that an aggressive Warrior deck is going to make the cut either. So to me, the cards are left pretty short, despite having some good options. Just not enough there. Now, for the hero power, this is another one a bit like Priest, where it's just not impactful enough in the early to mid game on the board. It doesn't influence things immediately. Yes, it's nice to armor up, but unlike, say, an upgraded Justicar Trueheart or Baku style hero power that doubles the total heal value, this one is just about making you more efficient. And that's usually less important in slower style decks. And clearly, the Warrior Hero Power is not important at all in aggressive decks. So in either scenario, it feels like Warrior's Hero Power just isn't going to contribute much. This is a pretty poor Hero Power for Genn Greymane. And that means for a final verdict, if the Hero Power is not great and the cards are maybe close but not quite there, that means this deck just isn't going to, or this class just isn't going to work for me. I think this is probably a D+ for Genn Greymane. And that sums it up, guys. There is my analysis of Genn Greymane. When I went into this discussion, I didn't really know what I thought yet. I kind of learned as I went. And I did identify Paladin as a fairly good fit right off. I thought Hunter might be, and really Paladin is the only one that was, at the end of the day, seemingly a perfect fit for Genn Greymane. There were a handful of others that might just be able to make something work in that C, C-, C+ range. So I guess there's a chance Genn Greymane could make sense. I still have a lot of doubts. I still have a lot of concerns. But when you look at it this way, there's a handful of classes you pretty much give up on right away. Handful others that you might have to try. There's going to be some deck experiments for Genn Greymane, certainly, to see if he works. All that said, I'm curious what you guys think. Have you already started putting together deck lists and ideas? Share in the comments what you figured out for Genn Greymane, what you think works, what doesn't work, what cards are most important and least important to empowering the style of deck for each of the classes. But until then, everybody, thank you so much for watching, and until next time, game on.